I was sitting on the warm Florida sand, watching the waves roll in and break against the shore, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. The sun was bright, the air smelled of salt and sunscreen, and for a moment I thought nothing in the world could disturb that peace. My grandson Ethan was running along the water's edge, his laughter mixing with the cries of the seagulls above. I smiled, soaking in the sight of him, when I pressed play on the message waiting for me. A strange male voice came through, low and urgent. "Leave quietly. Don't tell your children." Those words froze my blood. I looked around, as if someone nearby might step forward and explain, but there was only the endless blue water and the rhythm of the waves. Ethan kept playing, oblivious, his small feet splashing in the tide. My chest tightened as I replayed the message, the words echoing again, sharper this time. "Leave quietly. Don't tell your children." And at the beach with my kids, I received a voice message that changed everything. It was a warning I did not understand, but I obeyed. What I discovered later was a plan so cruel it nearly cost me everything I owned. My $2 million in savings, my home, even my freedom. The police would be called before it was over, but at that moment, I had no idea how close betrayal was. My name is Nora Whitfield. I am 65 years old, a widow, and a woman who spent her life believing that sacrifice was the same as love. I gave my son everything I could, and I opened my heart to his wife, hoping that kindness would mean family. What I learned was that sometimes kindness becomes a weapon used against you. Remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below if you want to hear more grandma life stories filled with emotion, betrayal, and unexpected strength. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, but the words stayed with me like an icy hand pressing against my spine. Who would send me such a message? Why warn me not to tell my children? My children. The thought brought me back to Daniel and Marissa, my son and his wife, who never seemed far from my life. They had been calling constantly, pressing for money, convincing me that every new emergency required my savings. I tried to breathe evenly, to keep my face calm so Ethan wouldn't notice, but inside my mind raced. The message came just as Daniel had been asking me for another $10,000, just as Marissa had hinted that I should sign certain papers for security. Could this be connected? Ethan called out to me, holding a shell he had found, the ridges catching the sunlight. I forced a smile, waved, and praised him. He ran back toward the waves, happy and carefree. My heart ached, knowing that one day he might see his parents for who they truly were. I prayed he would never blame me for what was coming. I stared out at the water again, listening to its roar. It felt like the ocean was trying to drown out the fear building inside me. The message was more than a warning. It was a command, a plea from someone who knew something I didn't. I tried to think of anyone in my circle who could care enough to protect me. A neighbor? A banker? Or was it someone who simply pitied an old woman being drained by her family? I replayed the message one more time, straining to recognize the voice, but it was distorted, almost mechanical, as if the man had gone out of his way to hide his identity. I shivered, though the Florida sun beat down hard. Then my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID made my stomach clench. Daniel. My son's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring once, twice, before answering, forcing myself to sound calm. "Mom, where are you?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Why didn't you tell us you took Ethan to the beach? Bring him back right now." Marissa's voice cut in behind him, shrill and insistent. "Yes, bring him home. We need to talk tonight." Their timing was too exact. The warning message had come just moments before they called, almost as if someone out there had known what they were about to say. My pulse quickened. I glanced at Ethan, still running free, his laughter riding the wind. I clenched the phone tighter, torn between fear and a dawning realization that the danger was closer than I had ever imagined. "Mom? Are you listening?" Daniel pressed. "Yes," I said softly, my throat tight. "I hear you." I ended the call without another word, something I had never dared to do before. For the first time, I felt a seed of rebellion sprouting inside me. Whoever left that message wanted me to keep quiet, to act normal, and for Ethan's sake, I did. But my mind was no longer quiet. I brushed sand from my legs, stood, and called Ethan back. He came running, holding his shell tight like a treasure. I hugged him, perhaps too tightly, and whispered, "Stay close to me." We walked together along the beach, the waves crashing beside us, the sun lowering in the sky. On the surface, it looked like any other afternoon, a grandmother enjoying a day with her grandson. But beneath that calm picture, I carried a warning that could not be ignored. I felt it in my bones. My world was about to unravel, and I had to decide whether I would be the victim or the fighter. The drive home from the beach should have felt like any other, but the message kept circling in my mind. When Ethan finally drifted off to sleep in the back seat, I found myself remembering the last time I had felt unwelcome in my own family's life. It wasn't long ago, and the memory was still raw. Daniel and Marissa had hosted a dinner party at their new condo. From the way Ethan described it, it was extravagant. Candlelight, crystal glasses, dishes with names I could hardly pronounce. I hadn't been invited. Instead, I had learned about it later, when Ethan came to stay with me that weekend. He spoke with the innocence only a 12-year-old could have, recounting every detail as though it were a fairy tale. "They said it was only for special people," he told me, swinging his legs at the kitchen table while eating the cookies I had baked. "But don't worry, Grandma. Daddy said you don't like those fancy dinners anyway." I smiled at him then, unwilling to let him see the crack that spread through my chest. He didn't know that I had given them $5,000 just a month earlier to buy the imported sofa that sat in their living room. Marissa had sent me a picture of it, thanking me with exaggerated sweetness, telling me how it made their home look more worthy of guests. But when the time came to show off that home, I was not on the guest list. I remembered how I had sat alone that evening, making a simple bowl of soup for myself, imagining the laughter spilling out of their condo, imagining my son raising his glass while his wife smiled at her circle of special people. I had raised Daniel to believe family mattered, but here I was, excluded from the very life my money had helped them build. The humiliation clung to me. It was not just about a party. It was about the message it carried. I was useful when I paid, invisible when I didn't. Later, while reviewing my financial papers, I found another betrayal hidden in black and white. Daniel had quietly sold the last shares of the company his father once worked so hard to build. Those shares had been meant to grow, to provide stability for me after his father's death. Instead, Daniel had liquidated them and drained the account without a word. When I confronted him gently over the phone, he brushed me off. "Mom, you don't need to worry about those things," he said. "I'm handling it. You should just relax." But it wasn't his to handle. It wasn't his to sell. Those shares had been a legacy from my husband, a piece of security that made me feel his presence still mattered. Daniel had taken that away as if it were his right. I thought of Marissa then, with her careful smiles and her polished nails tapping against the rim of her glass whenever we met. She often told me how grateful she was, but her eyes always scanned the room for something more. A bigger car, a more expensive trip, a new piece of jewelry. I knew she had grown up poor, and I understood the hunger that must have shaped her. But instead of humbling her, it had sharpened her. To her, my savings were not my future. They were her safety net. The voice message at the beach now felt heavier, almost prophetic. Someone out there knew what was happening to me. Someone wanted me to wake up before I signed away everything. I tucked Ethan into bed that night, kissed his forehead, and sat in the dark of my living room with only the ticking clock for company. Humiliation had turned to a quiet, burning anger. That night the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels almost unnatural. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the faint rattle of the ceiling fan above me, and the occasional car passing on the street outside were the only sounds. I sat in my armchair with the lamp casting a soft yellow glow across the room, trying to lose myself in a book I wasn't really reading. My mind wouldn't let go of the voice message from earlier at the beach. When the phone buzzed again, I jumped. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for it, half expecting Daniel or Marissa's number flashing on the screen. Instead, I saw unknown caller. My breath caught. Against my better judgment, I pressed play on the new voicemail. "If you want the truth," the distorted male voice said, "don't sign anything they give you." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles whitening. The words chilled me even more than the first message. "Don't sign anything." I whispered the warning aloud, as though repeating it would help me understand it. I thought of Daniel's last call, his demand for money, Marissa's sharp voice insisting I bring Ethan back immediately. I thought of the dinner I wasn't invited to, the shares Daniel had sold without permission, and now this. This message felt like a puzzle piece sliding into place, but I still couldn't see the whole picture. Someone out there knew things about my son and his wife that I didn't. The worst part was the anonymity. The caller ID gave me nothing, and when I tried to redial, the phone refused to connect. It was as if the message had slipped into my life from the shadows and vanished back into them. I set the phone down and rubbed my forehead, trying to calm the pounding in my temples. "Who are you?" I muttered into the empty room. "Why are you warning me?" The words had come with such urgency that I couldn't dismiss them. Sign what? What papers? My mind spun through possibilities. Power of attorney, guardianship, deeds, contracts. I knew enough stories of older people who had lost everything because they signed one piece of paper too many. Could my own son and his wife be leading me toward that fate? I closed my eyes, leaning back into the chair. The lamp buzzed faintly, and the air felt heavy. Then Ethan's small footsteps padded down the hallway. He appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "Grandma? Who called you?" His voice was groggy, innocent, carrying no idea of the storm brewing in my chest. I smiled faintly and patted the arm of the chair. "No one important, sweetheart. Just someone who dialed the wrong number." He nodded, satisfied, and shuffled back toward his room. But his question pierced me. If even he noticed the tension in my voice, how much longer could I keep the truth hidden? I picked the phone up again and scrolled through my contacts, tempted to call someone, anyone for reassurance. My circle was small. A few neighbors, a banker I trusted, a lawyer I had met years ago when settling my husband's estate. None of them seemed like the kind of person who would send cryptic warnings in the night. An unease swept through me, the sense that I was not as alone as I thought. For years I had felt invisible in my own family, useful only when my checkbook was open. Now I felt exposed in another way, as if unseen eyes were on me, watching every move. The thought drove me to check the small security camera I had installed months earlier near the front porch. I had bought it on sale, more for peace of mind than anything else. I rarely looked at it. But tonight, my hands fumbled to open the app. The screen flickered to life, and there it was, a shadowy figure just at the edge of the camera's range, standing still on the sidewalk. The angle blurred the details, but I could make out the shape of a man, tall, his face turned toward my house, my breath caught in my throat. I watched the screen for what felt like forever, waiting for him to move. Finally, he stepped back, his shape dissolving into the dark. Gone as quickly as he had appeared. I sat frozen in the chair, the phone heavy in my hand. The message, the figure outside, the growing demands from Daniel and Marissa. Everything was connecting in ways I wasn't ready to face. Fear tightened in my chest, but so did something else, something sharper, a determination I hadn't felt in years. I knew now that this wasn't just about being left out of a dinner or losing money here and there. Something larger was happening, something planned, and I would have to decide whether to shrink away or to fight. I turned off the lamp, sat in the dark, and listened to the night. The morning sun cut through the blinds, spilling streaks of light across my kitchen table. I had barely slept. My head still swam with the sound of the distorted voice telling me not to sign anything. The unease sat in my stomach like a stone, refusing to move no matter how much tea I drank. I tried to distract myself by making pancakes for Ethan, who had already sat down with his homework spread across the table. His small voice lifted my spirits a little as he recited multiplication tables under his breath. But just as I set the plate in front of him, my phone buzzed again. Daniel. My heart skipped, and I hesitated before answering. Ethan looked up at me, curious, but I forced a smile and pressed the green button. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice sharp and hurried, "we need $10,000 right now." I gripped the edge of the counter. "10,000? For what?" He sighed like I was being difficult. "It's an urgent debt. If I don't pay, things could get very bad." "You don't want that for me, do you?" Marissa's voice cut in from the background, high and impatient. "Tell her we can't wait. The bank is already calling. We need the transfer today." I swallowed hard. My fingers tapped nervously against the countertop. The warning from the night before thundered in my ears. Don't sign anything. And now don't send anything either. "Daniel, I can't just—" I started, but he interrupted. "You can, Mom. You've always helped before. What's the problem now? You know I'll pay you back." The words stung. I had heard them 100 times, each promise emptier than the last. The sofa, the car, the condo's down payment, none of it had been returned. "I'm not comfortable," I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended. There was a long pause, then his tone hardened. "Are you saying no?" My throat went dry. "I'm saying, I need to think about it." "You don't have time to think," Marissa snapped. "If you cared about us, you'd already be at the bank." I felt Ethan's eyes on me. He had stopped pretending to do his homework and was listening now, his fork suspended in the air. I turned away so he wouldn't see my tears welling. Daniel lowered his voice, but the edge remained. "Mom, don't make this difficult. If you don't help, we'll have no choice but to find another way to secure what's ours. You wouldn't want to lose your condo, would you?" My knees nearly buckled. "What do you mean by that?" "Just think about it," he muttered. Then the line went dead. I stood frozen, the dial tone echoing in my ear. My condo? How could he say that? I owned this small home outright. It was my sanctuary, the last place I had truly felt safe since my husband passed away. For Daniel to threaten it, even indirectly, shook me to my core. I lowered the phone slowly and set it on the counter. My hands were trembling. Ethan's voice broke the silence. "Grandma, is everything okay?" I forced a smile, though my lips quivered. "Yes, sweetheart. Yes. Eat your pancakes." He nodded, but didn't look convinced. His young eyes studied me carefully, too perceptive for his age. After breakfast, I retreated to my bedroom, shut the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. My mind replayed every warning, every betrayal. Daniel had already taken the shares, Marissa had already pushed me out of family gatherings, and now they were circling like vultures, demanding more, hinting at legal maneuvers that could strip me of everything. I pulled out the old file box from under my bed, the one where I kept financial records. I flipped through the bank statements, the check stubs, the receipts. The truth was laid bare in the numbers. I had given and given until my savings account, once healthy and secure at $2 million, was shrinking faster than I ever expected. I remembered my husband's words the day we set up those accounts. "This will keep you safe, Nora. No matter what happens, you'll always have this." And now the very people I had sacrificed for were clawing at it with greedy hands. The phone buzzed again. A text message this time. From Marissa. "If you don't wire the $10,000 today, we'll start making calls you won't like." I dropped the phone onto the bed, staring at it like it had become a venomous snake. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath shallow. The line between family and predator had never felt thinner. The house around me was the same as always. Photos of Daniel as a child still hung on the wall, smiling, innocent. The quilt I had sewn years ago still covered the bed, but suddenly it felt fragile, like the walls themselves could be taken from me with a single signature, a single lie. I pressed my palms together and whispered into the stillness, "Not this time." The warning voice was right. If I wanted the truth, if I wanted to protect myself, I had to stop. I had to refuse. I stood up, squared my shoulders, and walked back out to the kitchen. Ethan was humming softly, drawing on a scrap of paper. I bent down and kissed the top of his head. "Everything's fine," I told him. "We'll be just fine." Inside, though, I knew nothing was fine anymore. Something had shifted, something I couldn't undo, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a mother appeasing her children. I felt like a woman preparing for a fight. After Ethan left for school the next morning, the house fell into a silence that pressed against me from every corner. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee cooling beside me, a stack of folders spread out across the surface. The late morning light poured in through the blinds, but it did nothing to soften the heaviness in my chest. For years, I had avoided truly looking at the numbers. I told myself that generosity was a mother's duty, that helping Daniel and Marissa through every crisis was love in action. But after last night's phone call and the threatening message, I could no longer hide from the truth. I needed to see, in black and white, what I had allowed to happen. I opened the first folder. Receipts, checks, and transfer slips stared back at me. I picked up one dated nearly 15 years ago, Daniel's college tuition. My husband and I had covered every semester. I remembered the pride in Daniel's eyes at his graduation, though he hadn't stayed in his field of study long. Then came the car, $25,000, a reliable vehicle he traded within 2 years for something flashier. Page after page, the story of my savings unfolded. The down payment for Daniel and Marissa's condo, the $5,000 for the sofa, the trips they insisted would help strengthen their marriage. Each line item carried a memory, and each memory cut deeper now that I knew how little they valued the sacrifice behind it. By the time I reached the most recent statements, my hands were shaking. The total drained over the years had crossed more than $2 million. That number had once represented safety, a cushion for emergencies, a promise my husband whispered as he lay in his hospital bed. "You'll always have this, Nora. You'll never be left with nothing." And yet here I was, my son and his wife circling like wolves, demanding more. I took out a notepad and began to write. Tuition, $180,000. Cars, $80,000. Condo down payment, $400,000. Furnishings, jewelry, trips, constant small emergencies. The numbers grew and grew until the total sprawled across the page like an accusation. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the final figure. My chest tightened, and tears stung my eyes. For years, I had told myself this was what good mothers did: give without question, sacrifice without resentment. But in this quiet kitchen, surrounded by the cold truth of the numbers, I realized I had not been loved for my heart. I had been used for my account. I set my pen down and pressed my hands to my face. The humiliation from the dinner I wasn't invited to, the voice message, Daniel's threats about my condo, it all connected. I had been living like an open vault, and they had learned exactly how to rattle the lock. But the warning voice had changed something in me. For the first time, I wasn't only ashamed, I was angry. Not the explosive anger that lashes out and disappears, but a steady flame that burned hotter the longer I stared at the numbers on the page. Ethan's laughter from yesterday echoed in my memory. He had shown me his shell, proud and innocent. He loved me for who I was, not for what I could provide. And if I didn't act now, even his childhood would be poisoned by the schemes of his parents. I closed the folders and stacked them neatly, my decision solidifying with each movement. I had to protect what little I still had. I could not give Daniel and Marissa another cent, not because I didn't love them, but because real love meant drawing the line when harm was being done. The phone buzzed again. Another text from Daniel. "Did you get the money yet? Stop stalling." I didn't answer. Instead, I pushed the phone aside and took a deep breath. I wasn't going to keep playing the part they had written for me, the endless giver, the silent supporter. I was going to take back control. I rose from the table, gathered the folders, and slid them into a tote bag. My next stop would be the bank. I needed to talk to someone who understood money better than I did, someone who could help me lock the doors they had been prying open for years. As I grabbed my keys and headed out, a clarity settled over me. I wasn't just reflecting anymore. I was preparing. Every number I had written down was no longer a wound. It was evidence. Every tear I had shed was no longer weakness. It was resolve. The woman who left the house that morning was not the same woman who had returned from the beach 2 days ago. I was no longer just a mother, just a widow, just a source of money to be tapped whenever convenient. I was a woman ready to fight for her dignity, her independence, and the promise my husband had left me. The glass doors of the bank reflected the bright Florida morning as I pulled them open and stepped inside. Cool air washed over me, carrying the faint scent of polished wood and fresh paper. My tote bag felt heavy against my shoulder, stuffed with folders and receipts. For years I had walked into this branch to make simple deposits, to nod politely at the tellers, never imagining I would come here with trembling hands to defend my life's security. Behind the counter, familiar faces greeted me with practiced smiles, but today I wasn't here for routine. I asked softly if Mr. Parker was available. They told me he was in his office and buzzed me through the side door. I had known James Parker for over 20 years. He had been a young loan officer when my husband and I first bought our home, and over time, he had become the banker I trusted most. When I entered his office, he looked up from his computer and gave me a kind smile. His hair had gone gray since I first met him, but his eyes still held the same steady calm. "Nora," he said warmly, standing to shake my hand. "It's been a while. What brings you in?" I sat down, my bag settling with a thud on the floor. "James," I began, my voice quieter than I intended. "I need help. I need to protect what's left of my savings." His expression shifted from polite curiosity to concern. "Of course. Tell me what's going on." I took out the folders, spreading them across his desk. Over the years, I've given Daniel and Marissa more than I can even count. Tuition, cars, their condo, constant requests for emergencies. They keep asking for more, and now they're threatening me. They said if I don't give them $10,000, I could lose my condo. Mr. Parker leaned forward, his hands folded. He listened carefully as I recounted everything. The voice messages, the late-night phone call, the text threats. When I finished, his jaw tightened. "This," he said firmly, "is financial abuse. Elder financial abuse, to be precise. I've seen it before, and I can tell you it never ends well if it isn't stopped." The words hit me like a strike of lightning. Abuse. I had never put that label on it before. I had told myself it was family obligation, love expressed through sacrifice. But hearing the word from him made the truth undeniable. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He opened a drawer and pulled out a few forms. "First, we'll put safeguards on your accounts. I can set it so no money moves without your signature in person. We can block automatic transfers, and I'll put alerts on large withdrawals." As he spoke, my phone buzzed again. Daniel's name lit the screen. I pressed decline and placed the phone face down on the desk. My pulse raced, but for the first time, I felt a flicker of control. "You're not alone, Nora," Parker continued. "I've worked with families where the children drained everything, and by the time the parents realized, it was too late. We won't let that happen to you." Tears blurred my vision, but I blinked them away. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me." He gave me a small nod. "I do. And if this ever ends up in court, I'll testify to what I've seen today. Your records are clear. The pattern is there. It tells a story, and it's not one that favors your son and daughter-in-law." I sat back in the chair, absorbing his words. For years, I had been isolated, convinced that my suffering was private, invisible. Now here was someone naming it, acknowledging it, offering me a way to fight back. As he finalized the changes, Daniel called again, his persistence like a drumbeat. I silenced the phone, a calm resolve settling over me. When the paperwork was done, Mr. Parker handed me copies. "Keep these safe," he said, "and remember, you have rights. They cannot take your independence unless you let them. If they try, you'll need a good lawyer. Do you have one?" I thought of Ruth Delgado, the elder rights attorney Lillian once mentioned in passing, though I hadn't spoken to her yet. "Not yet," I admitted. Then find one, Parker advised. Sooner rather than later. This is only the beginning. I stood, shaking his hand firmly. Thank you, James, for everything. As I left the office, the relief was almost overwhelming. The accounts were safe, at least for now. But Parker's warning lingered. This is only the beginning. Walking back to my car, I glanced at the phone again. 10 missed calls, 3 voicemails from Daniel, 2 from Marissa. My hands trembled as I unlocked the door, but my spirit felt steadier than it had in years. The ride back from the bank was quiet, but my heart pounded with every mile. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I saw Daniel's car parked right outside my house. Marissa was standing by the porch steps, her arms crossed, her expression tight with impatience. My stomach sank. They hadn't even waited. As I stepped out of the car, Daniel stormed toward me. "Why haven't you been answering your phone?" His voice was sharp, cutting through the warm afternoon air. I held my tote bag close. I was busy. Busy? Marissa's tone dripped with mock sweetness. Too busy to help your own family? She looked polished as ever, her hair perfectly styled, her jewelry catching the sun, but her eyes burned with calculation. Before I could respond, another figure appeared, Mr. Calder, a lawyer I recognized from one of Daniel's past business dealings. He adjusted his tie, holding a folder under his arm. The sight of him made my pulse race. Daniel gestured toward him. "We came prepared, Mom. This is Calder. He's going to help us straighten things out legally." Marissa stepped closer, slipping an envelope into my hand. "These are just some papers we need you to sign, for security, that's all." I froze. The warning echoed in my head. Don't sign anything they give you. My throat tightened as I unfolded the papers. The words jumped out at me. Power of attorney. If I signed, they would control everything. My savings, my home, even decisions about my health. "No," I whispered, the word trembling in the air. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Mom, don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're only trying to help. You're not thinking clearly these days." I felt my spine stiffen. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, and I'm not signing this. Marissa's voice cracked as she clutched her chest. "Daniel, do you hear this? She's accusing us of trying to hurt her, after everything we've done for her." Her tears looked rehearsed, her sobs too sharp, like lines delivered on stage. Calder finally spoke, his tone smooth but menacing. "Mrs. Whitfield, refusing to cooperate will only raise questions about your mental stability. Guardianship might become necessary if you continue down this path. It's in everyone's best interest that you sign today." I clenched the papers in my hand, my body trembling, but my voice stayed firm. "My mental health is just fine. What's questionable is why my son and his wife are so desperate to take over what doesn't belong to them." Daniel's face flushed with anger. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so Ethan, who had just stepped out onto the porch, wouldn't hear. "Stop this, Mom. You're embarrassing yourself. If you don't trust us, then who will you trust?" I glanced at Ethan. His wide eyes flicked between us, confusion etched on his young face. "Grandma?" he whispered. I forced a calm smile for him. "It's all right, sweetheart. Go back inside." When he hesitated, Marissa snapped, "Ethan, now!" He shuffled back reluctantly, but I knew he was listening just beyond the doorway. I straightened, handing the unsigned papers back to Calder. "I won't be bullied, not by anyone. This is my home, my life, and I will not hand it over." Marissa's mask slipped, her voice sharp as glass. "You think you can stop us? You're old, Nora. Old and tired. Sooner or later you'll need us, and then you'll regret this." Her words cut deep, but they also lit a fire inside me. I had spent years shrinking under their demands, convincing myself it was love. But standing there on my own porch, with the sun setting behind me, I realized I was no longer afraid of them. Daniel grabbed Calder's folder and shoved it back under his arm. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "But don't say we didn't try to make this easy. You'll hear from us again soon, and next time it won't be a request." I stood still as they turned, stomping back to their car. Gravel crunched under their tires as they sped off, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Inside the house, I closed the door and leaned against it, my chest heaving. Ethan peeked around the corner, his face pale. "Grandma, what did they want you to sign?" I knelt down, brushing his hair gently from his forehead. "Something I should never sign, sweetheart. And I didn't. That's what matters." His shoulders relaxed slightly, but worry still lingered in his eyes. I hugged him tight, the weight of the moment settling into my bones. They had shown their hand now. This wasn't about family dinners or small debts. It was about total control. They wanted everything, and they wouldn't stop until they had it. But I had something they didn't expect. I had resolve, and I had allies waiting in the shadows, people who would soon step forward to help me fight. The house was quiet after Daniel and Marissa stormed off, but the silence didn't bring peace. It felt heavy, charged with tension, as though the walls themselves remembered the shouting that had just filled the rooms. I sat at the kitchen table with Ethan, trying to distract him with cookies and milk. His little hands trembled as he held the glass, and I knew the confrontation had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. "Grandma," he asked softly, "are they mad at you?" I reached across the table and held his hand. "They're upset because I didn't do what they wanted. But I promise you, I'm going to be okay." His eyes searched mine, and though he nodded, I could see the worry lingering. Before I could say more, a knock came at the back door. I stiffened, half expecting Daniel to have returned. But when I opened it, relief washed over me. "Lillian," I breathed out. She stood on the porch in her faded cardigan, her silver hair pulled back into a neat bun. Her eyes, though kind, were sharp with concern. "I heard raised voices," she said. "Is everything all right?" I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. "Come in. I could use the company." She glanced at Ethan, offered him a smile, and then waited until he retreated to the living room before lowering her voice. "They were here again, weren't they? Your son and his wife." I nodded, the weight of the evening pressing on me all over again. "They brought a lawyer this time, tried to get me to sign papers giving them control." Lillian's face tightened, the lines around her mouth deepening. "Power of attorney?" "Yes," I whispered. She sank into the chair across from me. For a long moment she was silent, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Then she looked at me with an intensity that surprised me. "Nora, I need to tell you something I've never said out loud to anyone outside my family. Years ago, my daughter did the same thing to me." I leaned forward, shocked. "Your daughter?" She nodded. "After my husband died, she convinced me I couldn't handle the bills, the accounts, the decisions. She had me sign over everything. Within a year, my savings were gone. She sold the house I loved, put me in a small apartment, and told everyone it was for my own good. It took me nearly a decade and a bitter court fight to regain even a fraction of what I'd lost. I still carry the scars." Her voice broke, and I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. "I had no idea." "Most people don't," she said bitterly. "Because when it's family, outsiders assume it's love, not exploitation. But I see the signs, Nora. What Daniel and Marissa are doing, it's the same path my daughter walked, and it only ends one way if you don't stop it." I swallowed hard, her story cutting into me like a blade. "What did you do? How did you fight back?" She squeezed my hand. "I found someone who believed me, a lawyer who specialized in elder rights. Without her, I would have been lost." Her eyes brightened with determination. "I know a woman, Ruth Delgado. She's one of the few in this county who takes cases like ours seriously. She helped a friend of mine just last year. If Daniel and Marissa try to push guardianship, Ruth will know exactly how to fight it." The name settled in my mind like an anchor. Ruth Delgado, someone who could turn my desperation into a plan. "Do you really think she would help me?" I asked. "I know she would," Lillian said firmly, "and I'll stand by you every step of the way. You won't go through this alone." I felt tears prick my eyes, but this time they weren't from helplessness. They were from gratitude. For so long, I had felt like a solitary figure, enduring humiliation and betrayal in silence. But here was someone who understood, who had walked the same road and survived. From the living room, Ethan called out, "Grandma, can I show Ms. Brooks my drawing?" Lillian smiled, her face softening as Ethan ran in with a paper covered in bright colors. "Of course," she said warmly, admiring his work. Then she looked at me again, her gaze steady. "That boy deserves to grow up knowing his grandmother is strong enough to fight back. Don't let them take that from him." Her words lodged deep in my chest. For Ethan, for myself, for the promise my husband had left me. I couldn't let Daniel and Marissa win. As evening fell and Lillian left, I locked the door behind her and leaned against it, my resolve solidifying. The next day I tried to carry on as if nothing had happened. I told myself that a trip to the supermarket might clear my head. Normal errands, normal routines, those were things Daniel and Marissa could not take away from me. I grabbed my shopping list, tucked my wallet into my purse, and drove into town. The automatic doors slid open, releasing the familiar smell of polished floors and fresh produce. Bright fluorescent lights hummed above me as I pushed the cart down the first aisle. I tried to focus on small things, comparing brands of cereal, checking expiration dates on cartons of milk. Simple tasks I had always done without thought now felt strangely important, like anchors holding me to reality. But after a few minutes, the hair on the back of my neck prickled. I couldn't shake the sensation that someone was watching me. I glanced over my shoulder casually and saw a man lingering by the entrance to the bakery section. He pretended to examine a tray of muffins, but when I turned down the canned goods aisle, he moved too, keeping his distance, but never quite disappearing from view. I forced myself to keep pushing the cart. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe it was just paranoia after the voicemails and the confrontation at home. But then it happened again. No matter which aisle I turned into, frozen foods, cleaning supplies, even paper products, he was there. Not close enough to speak, but close enough that I could feel the weight of his eyes. My heart began to race. I gripped the handle of the cart until my knuckles went white. I reached for my phone and quickly dialed Mr. Parker, but it rang and rang without an answer. I left a hurried message, my voice shaking. "James, I think someone's following me. I'm at the market. Please call me back." I tucked the phone into my purse and tried to calm my breathing. Ethan wasn't with me, thank God, but I still felt exposed, alone among strangers who paid no attention to the quiet drama unfolding between the aisles of pasta and canned beans. The man finally stepped closer when I reached the dairy section. He was tall, wearing a plain jacket, his face half hidden by the brim of a baseball cap. I turned quickly, ready to abandon my cart and leave when he spoke. "Mrs. Whitfield?" I froze. Hearing my name from his lips made my blood run cold. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice louder than I intended. A few shoppers looked up briefly, then returned to their lists. He raised his hand slightly, as if to calm me. "Please don't be alarmed. My name is David Harris. I'm a journalist with the local paper." I blinked, taken aback. "A journalist? Why are you following me?" His eyes flickered with urgency. "Because you're in danger. I've been investigating cases of elder exploitation in this county. Word travels fast in small towns. There are rumors your family is preparing a guardianship petition against you. If they succeed, you'll lose everything. Your savings, your home, your independence." The words hit me like a punch. Guardianship. The very fear that had been scratching at the edges of my mind since Calder appeared with those papers. Harris lowered his voice, glancing around. "I have proof. Your son met with another lawyer last week, not Calder but someone else, to draft guardianship documents. I have photographs of the meeting, copies of notes. I didn't know how to reach you safely, so I followed you here. I needed to warn you before it's too late." I leaned against the cold glass of the dairy case, my knees weak. "Why would you help me?" I asked, suspicious but desperate. He hesitated, then spoke with conviction. "Because I've seen it before. I wrote an article last year about a woman who lost her farm after her children declared her incompetent. I thought the piece would change things, but instead I was threatened. I nearly lost my job. I couldn't stop her suffering. But I can try to stop yours. His words stirred something inside me, a mix of fear and a strange, fragile hope. Could it be that strangers cared more for my well-being than my own blood? I looked at him closely. His face was lined with weariness, but his eyes were steady. He pulled a small envelope from his jacket and pressed it into my hand. This has copies of what I found. Use it wisely. And find a lawyer who specializes in these cases. If you fight back, I'll stand with you. The envelope felt heavy despite its size. I slipped it into my purse, my fingers trembling. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded, then stepped back. "Stay alert, Mrs. Whitfield. They're moving faster than you realize." With that, he turned and disappeared into the crowd of shoppers. I stood frozen for a long moment before I forced myself to continue, grabbing a gallon of milk and a loaf of bread I didn't need. The world felt different now, sharper, as though every face around me might be hiding a secret. When I finally checked out and returned to my car, I locked the doors immediately, clutching my purse like a lifeline. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked pale, shaken, but resolved. As I drove home, Harris's words echoed in my head. Guardianship. Proof. Fight back. For years, I had been silent, enduring. The drive home from the supermarket was a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about the envelope Harris had pressed into my hand. As soon as I got inside, I locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat at the kitchen table. My fingers shook as I slid the papers out. There were photographs, grainy but clear enough to recognize Daniel sitting across from another attorney I didn't know. Notes scribbled in the margins mentioned guardianship, petition, and asset control. It was all there, undeniable. The weight of betrayal pressed against my chest until I could barely breathe. I wanted to crumble, but then I thought of Ethan, his trust in me, his innocent eyes when he asked if I was okay. I couldn't let him grow up believing his parents' greed was normal. I couldn't let them strip me of everything my husband and I had worked for. I needed help, real help. The name Lillian had mentioned came back to me like a lifeline. Ruth Delgado. I dug through the drawer where I kept old community newsletters and church bulletins until I found a flyer with her name printed across the top. Elder Rights Attorney, Protecting Dignity and Independence. I dialed the number before I lost my nerve. Her receptionist answered, and within minutes, Ruth herself picked up. Her voice was calm, steady, but firm, the kind of voice that made you believe she had seen storms before and weathered them all. I explained briefly what was happening, my words tumbling out faster than I intended. She listened without interruption, then said, "Mrs. Whitfield, I want you to come into my office tomorrow morning. Bring every document you have, bank statements, texts, anything. This is serious, but you've already taken the most important step, reaching out." When I walked into her office the next day, I felt the difference immediately. The space was modest, lined with bookshelves filled with thick legal volumes and framed photographs of her family. A small plant sat on the corner of her desk, its leaves stretching toward the sunlight. She rose to greet me, her handshake strong and reassuring. She looked to be in her mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back neatly and eyes that held both warmth and resolve. "Please, sit," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Tell me everything from the beginning." I opened my tote bag and spread out the folders, the notes from Harris, the financial records Parker had helped me organize. My voice shook at first, but as I spoke, I grew steadier. She nodded often, jotting notes, occasionally asking a pointed question. When I finished, she leaned back, her expression grave but focused. "This is a textbook case of elder financial abuse," she said. "Your son and his wife are attempting to manipulate you into signing away control. If they succeed with a guardianship petition, you could lose not just your savings, but your right to make decisions about your own life." The words hit me hard, but there was strength in hearing them named so clearly. "What can I do?" I asked. She tapped the papers Harris had provided. "This is excellent evidence. Photographs of meetings, notes that mention guardianship, these show intent. Combined with your bank statements, Parker's testimony about suspicious withdrawals, and any records of threats you've received, we can build a strong defense. And not just defense, we can go on the offensive. I blinked. Offensive? Yes, she said firmly. We don't just wait for them to act. We file a protective petition of our own. We document the abuse, present witnesses, and show the court that you are competent and capable. The more proactive we are, the stronger our position will be when they try to move forward. Her confidence filled the room, lifting some of the weight from my shoulders. Do you really think we can win? She leaned forward, her gaze steady. I know we can, but you must be prepared. They will fight dirty. Calder is known for aggressive tactics. He'll paint you as forgetful, unstable, unable to manage your affairs. That's why we need witnesses. Mr. Parker can testify to your clarity at the bank. Lillian can speak to your independence at home. And if Ethan is willing, his voice could be powerful, though that would be a last resort given his age. I thought of Ethan, his small hand clutching mine, his whispered questions. The idea of putting him in the middle made my heart ache. But I also knew he had already seen too much. Ruth must have read the hesitation on my face. Don't worry. We'll protect him as best we can. For now, focus on gathering every shred of evidence. Save the voicemails, the texts, anything that shows pressure or threats. And Nora... Yes? You are not weak, she said firmly. You are not helpless. They count on you believing that so they can take control. But you've already proven otherwise. You came here. You're fighting back. That is strength. Her words struck deep. For years I had seen myself as nothing more than a mother trying to keep her family happy, even at the cost of myself. Now, sitting across from Ruth Delgado, I felt something shift. For the first time in a long while, I believed I could win. I left her office with a folder of instructions and a sense of direction. The fight was far from over, but now I wasn't alone. I had Parker, I had Lillian, I had Harris, and now I had Ruth, each one carrying their own reasons to stand against injustice. 2 days after meeting with Ruth, I was beginning to feel steadier. I had followed her instructions carefully, saving every message, copying every receipt, and keeping Harris's envelope tucked safely inside my desk. For the first time in years, I felt like I was no longer drifting. I had a plan, but peace never lasted long in my house. That morning, as I was folding laundry, a sharp knock rattled the front door. I peered through the window and felt my stomach drop. A man in a county badge vest stood outside, flanked by another uniformed officer. My heart thudded. I opened the door cautiously. The taller man stepped forward, introducing himself in a clipped voice. Mrs. Whitfield? I'm Charles Holden, County Social Services. We received a complaint regarding your ability to care for yourself. This officer is here to accompany me while I conduct a wellness check. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I forced out the words, A complaint? From who? Holden's eyes flicked down to his clipboard. It was filed anonymously, but the report claims you may be experiencing memory issues, confusion with finances, and an inability to live independently. The room seemed to tilt. Memory issues? Confusion? It was Daniel and Marissa's doing. I knew it instantly. This was their next move, the first step in painting me incompetent. I stood aside, my hands trembling. Come in then. Holden walked into the living room, scanning everything with clinical detachment. The tidy shelves, the folded laundry on the couch, Ethan's school drawings pinned proudly to the fridge. The officer remained by the door, arms crossed. Do you live alone? Holden asked, flipping a page on his clipboard. Yes, except when my grandson visits, I replied, keeping my voice steady. And how do you handle daily tasks? Shopping, cooking, bills? I resisted the urge to snap back. I shop weekly. I pay my own bills. I cook for myself every day. Do you need me to show you the checkbook? He gave a slight nod. If you have it. I retrieved the ledger from my desk and handed it to him. My handwriting filled the pages in neat lines. Dates, amounts, notes. Every entry balanced. He studied it, his brow furrowing slightly. "Impressive," he muttered, then cleared his throat. "But the report mentioned erratic behavior. Have you experienced episodes of confusion?" Anger simmered beneath my fear. "No. What I have experienced is harassment from my son and his wife, who seem determined to take away my independence." Before he could respond, another knock came at the door. My heart sank again. This time, it was Ruth. She stepped inside briskly, her eyes flashing when she saw Holden. "Mrs. Whitfield called me yesterday about ongoing harassment," she said firmly. "I'm her attorney. If you're here on an investigation, you'll direct all further questions through me." Holden straightened, clearly irritated. "Ma'am, this is a standard wellness check. We received credible concerns from parties with a financial interest in declaring her incompetent," Ruth interrupted. "Unless you have medical evidence or court authorization, you're not declaring anything today." The officer shifted uneasily, glancing between them. Holden pressed on, his voice defensive. "We're simply documenting conditions. That's my job." "Then document this," Ruth snapped. She pointed toward the coffee table, where I had already stacked folders. Bank records showing systematic draining of her accounts, text messages demanding money, voicemails threatening her home, and witnesses, neighbors, a banker, and a journalist ready to testify. Holden's eyes widened as Ruth laid the papers in front of him. His confident posture faltered. "This woman," Ruth continued, her voice steady as steel, "is fully capable of managing her life. What she is experiencing is not dementia. It is exploitation. And if your department chooses to side with her abusers, you'll find yourself listed in the complaint we file next." For a long moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Then Holden coughed lightly, scribbled something on his clipboard, and closed it. "Very well. We'll note that Mrs. Whitfield appears competent at this time." Ruth crossed her arms. "At this time and for the foreseeable future." Holden nodded stiffly, signaling to the officer, and they both left without another word. The door shut behind them with a final click that echoed through the house. I collapsed into the armchair, my whole body trembling. Ruth knelt beside me, her voice softening. "You did well, Nora. They tried to rattle you, but you stayed strong." I let out a shaky breath. "If you hadn't come..." "They'll keep trying," she warned, "but we'll keep fighting. Today proved you're not alone. Remember that." From across the street, I caught a glimpse of movement, Harris standing near his car with a camera raised discreetly. He had been there recording everything. Relief washed over me. Proof. That was what we needed, and now we had it. I looked at Ruth, my fear slowly transforming into resolve. "They won't stop, will they?" The morning after the visit from social services, I sat at the kitchen table with Ruth. The folders and papers were spread across the wood like weapons being laid out before a battle. She had come early, determined to prepare before Daniel and Marissa made their next move. "They've filed," Ruth said bluntly, sliding a packet of documents toward me. "Guardianship petition. It was submitted late yesterday afternoon. They're claiming you're no longer capable of managing your affairs." The words sent a chill down my spine, but I forced myself to look at the packet. The accusations leapt off the page. Allegations of forgetfulness, claims I was neglecting my health, suggestions I had fallen for scams, lies, every single one. "They're trying to rewrite my life," I whispered. Ruth's voice was calm but firm. "That's what guardianship abuse looks like. They're building a narrative to convince the court you're incompetent, but we're not going to let them control the story." She began ticking items off a list. First, witnesses. "Mr. Parker can testify about your clarity at the bank and the steps you took to protect your accounts. Lillian can speak to your independence at home and your ability to manage daily tasks. Harris has photographs, documents, and recordings of their meetings with lawyers. That alone undermines their entire claim." I nodded slowly, trying to absorb it all. "What about Ethan?" Ruth hesitated. "He's young, but his voice could be powerful. If he chooses to speak, the court will listen. Children often reveal truths adults overlook, but we won't pressure him. That decision has to come from him." I thought of his worried face, the way he had asked if I was all right. He loved his parents, but he also loved me. The thought of putting him in the middle made my chest ache, yet I knew he had already been drawn into the conflict. Ruth continued. Second, financial records. We'll show the pattern. $2 million in savings drained over decades with no repayment. That establishes motive. Combined with their threats, it paints a clear picture of exploitation. She shuffled through the documents and tapped one page. And then there's Calder. He'll represent them, and he's known for twisting facts. He'll try to portray you as confused, frail, emotional. We need to counter every point with evidence and calm testimony. The mention of Calder sent a ripple of anger through me. I could still hear his voice from the day on my porch, suggesting my mental health was questionable. I clenched my fists, feeling the burn of humiliation all over again. But now, instead of shrinking, I felt myself straightening. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. Ruth's eyes met mine. "Be ready. Stay steady. Don't let them rattle you. When you testify, speak clearly, directly. You know your truth. Let the court hear it." We spent the rest of the morning rehearsing. She asked me questions about my daily life, how I shopped, how I paid bills, how I kept track of expenses. I answered carefully, showing her the ledgers and receipts I had kept. Each time I stumbled, she guided me back, reminding me to breathe, to focus. By noon, I felt exhausted, but also stronger. The fear that had paralyzed me days earlier was giving way to determination. In the afternoon, Harris arrived, carrying a folder thicker than before. "I've compiled everything," he said, laying it on the table. Photographs, transcripts of meetings, even audio recordings from a source who overheard Calder discussing strategy with Daniel. Ruth flipped through the evidence, her lips pressing into a tight line of satisfaction. "This is excellent. With this, we don't just defend Nora, we expose them." Parker joined us later, bringing notarized statements and account records. He clasped my hand firmly. "I've seen too many cases where the parents lost everything, not this time. I'll stand in that courtroom with you." When Lillian arrived, she carried a basket of muffins, but also a quiet strength. "I'll testify," she said simply. "I'll tell them what happened to me and how I see the same signs in Daniel and Marissa. They can't silence all of us." As the day wore on, the kitchen that once felt like a place of loneliness became a war room filled with allies. Each person carried scars of their own. Harris with his failed investigation, Lillian with her betrayal, Parker with his regrets from past clients. And now they had all gathered, ready to fight with me. As evening fell, Ruth packed up the documents and looked at me steadily. "The hearing is scheduled in 3 days. It will be intense, Nora. They'll push hard, and they'll lie. But we have the truth, and with the truth, we will win." I walked them all to the door, one by one, hugging each of them with gratitude. When the house grew quiet again, I sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker on. For years, I had been alone, drowning in silent humiliation. Now, I had an army. The fear still lingered, but it no longer controlled me. The courtroom would decide my fate, but I was no longer entering it as a helpless widow. The county courthouse was colder than I remembered. Its tall marble columns and echoing halls seemed designed to make people feel small. I clutched my folder tightly against my chest, the weight of every paper, every receipt, every voicemail pressing down on me. Ruth walked beside me, her stride steady, her briefcase swinging at her side. Inside the courtroom, Daniel and Marissa were already seated at the petitioner's table. Daniel wore a suit that didn't quite fit, his jaw clenched tight. Marissa's hair was perfectly styled, her smile faint but smug. At their side sat Calder, crisp in his gray suit, flipping through notes with the confidence of a man who believed the verdict was already his. When the judge entered, everyone rose. My knees trembled, but I stood tall. I had promised myself that no matter what happened, I would not shrink in front of them. The proceedings began with Calder painting his story. "Your Honor, this case is about concern," he said smoothly. "Concern for a mother who is no longer capable of managing her affairs. Mrs. Whitfield has displayed signs of confusion, memory lapses, erratic behavior with money. My clients only want to protect her." I bit my tongue to keep from shouting. "Protect me? They wanted to strip me of everything." Ruth rose for the cross-examination. Her voice was calm, sharp. "Mrs. Whitfield is not incompetent. What she is a target, and today we will prove it." The first witnesses were called. Calder brought forward a neighbor I barely knew, who claimed I had once left my trash out on the wrong day, suggesting forgetfulness. Another said I often looked tired when checking my mail. Their words felt flimsy, stretched thin, but Calder framed them as evidence of decline. Then Ruth stood. "I call Mr. James Parker." Parker walked to the stand, his presence steady. He testified about the safeguards he had helped me put on my accounts, about my clarity during every transaction. "She knew exactly what she was doing," he told the court firmly. "The only confusion I've seen is from her son and daughter-in-law demanding money that wasn't theirs." Next came Lillian. Her voice shook at first as she recounted her own story, how her daughter had once done to her what Daniel and Marissa were trying to do to me. But then her voice grew stronger. "I've watched Nora manage her home and her life with dignity. What's happening here isn't about care, it's about control." Harris followed, laying out photographs and transcripts, evidence of Daniel meeting with another lawyer to prepare guardianship documents before I had even shown a single sign of decline. Gasps rippled through the room as the images were projected on the screen. Calder tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a firm hand. Finally, Ruth called the last witness. "Ethan Whitfield." My breath caught. My grandson stepped hesitantly to the stand, his small frame dwarfed by the chair. He looked nervous, but when he glanced at me, his eyes steadied. "Ethan," Ruth said gently, "can you tell the court about your grandmother?" He nodded. "She takes care of me. She cooks for me, helps me with homework. She remembers everything I tell her. She's the one who makes me feel safe." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, whispering harshly to Calder. Marissa's face paled. "Has your grandmother ever seemed confused or unable to take care of herself?" Ruth asked. "No," Ethan said firmly. Then he turned to the judge, his young voice clear. "She's fine. They just want her money. I heard them talking about it when they thought I wasn't listening." The courtroom fell silent. My heart swelled with pride and sorrow all at once. No child should have to speak such words, but his courage cut through every lie they had built. Ruth placed her hand on my shoulder as she delivered the closing statement. "Your Honor, this is not about incompetence. This is about greed. Mrs. Whitfield has been clear-headed, responsible, and strong. It is her son and daughter-in-law who are exploiting her trust. We ask that the petition be denied, and that this court protect her rights, not strip them away." The judge leaned back, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, the only sound was the rustling of papers. Then he spoke. "This court finds the petition for guardianship unsubstantiated. Mrs. Whitfield is fully competent to manage her affairs. Furthermore, due to evidence of fraudulent documents and financial coercion, I am referring Daniel and Marissa Whitfield for investigation by the county prosecutor." Daniel's face drained of color. Marissa gasped, clutching his arm. Calder slammed his folder shut, his confidence evaporating. The courthouse steps felt different under my feet as I walked out that afternoon. For months I had carried a weight I couldn't name, a constant pressure of doubt, fear, and humiliation. Now, with the judge's ruling echoing in my ears, the air felt lighter, the world sharper. I was free. Not only in the legal sense, but in a way I hadn't felt since before Daniel and Marissa began circling my life like vultures. Ruth walked beside me, her expression steady but softened by a small smile. "You did it, Nora. You stood tall, and the court listened." "I couldn't have done it without you," I said, my voice catching, "or without Parker, or Lillian, or Harris, even Ethan." At the mention of Ethan, my heart tightened. He had been brave beyond his years, speaking truths that no child should ever have to say in public. The judge had praised his courage, and I silently vowed to protect him from ever being dragged into such ugliness again. That evening, back home, I unlocked the front door with hands that no longer trembled. The house greeted me with its familiar quiet, but the silence was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful. My sanctuary had been returned to me, not as a cage, but as a fortress. I set my purse down and walked into the living room. Sunlight spilled across the photos on the wall, pictures of Daniel as a boy, his gap-toothed grin once so innocent. My chest ached as I stared at them. He had not started out as my enemy. He had been my baby, my pride. But somewhere along the way, fear and greed had twisted him. The court's decision could not undo the fracture in our bond. That wound would remain. I went to my desk and pulled out the folders one last time. I didn't need them anymore for defense, but they were a record of the truth. $2 million saved over a lifetime of work and sacrifice, drained little by people I loved. I closed the folders and locked them away. Those numbers would no longer define me. The next morning, I met with Parker at the bank. His handshake was firm, his eyes warm. "Congratulations," he said. "You've done what many couldn't." "Now it's time to make sure this never happens again," I replied. Together we set up new safeguards, stronger than before, multiple authorizations required for large withdrawals, alerts directly to Ruth's office, and then, with Parker's help, I moved a portion of my savings into a separate trust, one that would not be accessible to Daniel or Marissa, no matter what tricks they tried. I also made another decision. I withdrew $200,000 and opened a scholarship fund in Ethan's name. It wasn't about punishing his parents. It was about ensuring he had opportunities that came from love, not manipulation. The thought of his future being touched by something pure and safe filled me with quiet joy. When I told him later, his eyes lit up. "A scholarship? For me?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said, hugging him close. "For you. So that no matter what happens, you'll always have something of your own." He pressed his face into my shoulder, and I felt his small body relax. In that moment, I knew I had given him more than money. I had given him security that couldn't be stolen. Back at home, I took practical steps too. I changed the locks on every door. I had new cameras installed around the property, stronger than the one I had relied on before. And for the first time in years, I felt safe within my own walls. Days later, I returned to the beach. The same Florida sand stretched wide beneath the sun, the waves curling in gentle arcs. I carried Ethan's shell in my pocket, the one he had shown me that day when everything began. Standing there, I breathed deeply, the salt air filling my lungs. The first voicemail had come here. It had been the spark that lit a fire I didn't know I still had inside me. Now, standing in the same place, I felt the circle close. I was no longer the woman who trembled at a distorted voice in the dark. I was no longer the widow who mistook sacrifice for love. I was Nora Whitfield, whole again. I sat on the sand, letting the surf wash against my feet, and watched the horizon glow gold with the setting sun. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the phone to buzz with demands. The days after the hearing passed quietly, almost eerily so. For so long, my life had been punctuated by demands, accusations, and threats. Now, the silence that settled around me was not heavy or suffocating. It was a silence of peace. I woke each morning to the sound of birds in the yard, not the buzzing of my phone. I made coffee without checking for angry messages. I walked through my house without wondering if the walls themselves might be sold out from under me. Sitting at my kitchen table one evening, I found myself holding Ethan's drawing from weeks ago. The bright colors had smudged in places where his hands pressed too hard with the crayon. He had written "for Grandma" at the bottom in his uneven handwriting. It was not just a picture. It was a reminder that love is not measured in money or things. Love is shown in small, honest ways, a drawing, a hug, a word of truth spoken when it mattered most. I thought back to the very beginning, that day at the beach when the voicemail had shattered the calm. "Leave quietly. "Don't tell your children." At the time, I hadn't understood what it meant. I only knew it chilled me. But now, looking back, I realized it had saved me. Those words had forced me to see the truth I had tried to ignore for too long. At the beach with my kids, I received a voice message that changed everything. It warned me to walk away, to stay quiet, and because I obeyed, I uncovered the plan that nearly destroyed me. My son and his wife tried to steal everything I owned, including the $2 million I had worked and sacrificed for. And in the end, the police were called, the court listened, and justice was done. I wish I could say Daniel and Marissa learned from it, that they came to me with apologies and remorse. But the truth is harder. They turned away, consumed by their anger, unable to see past their own greed. The bond between us, mother and son, daughter-in-law and mother-in-law, was broken long before the judge struck his gavel. It hurt to admit that, but some truths must be faced, no matter how painful. What I gained, though, was something more important than reconciliation. I gained back myself. I found the strength to draw boundaries, to say no, to claim the life my husband had wanted for me when he left me those savings. I honored his promise by refusing to let our sacrifices be wasted, and I was not alone. Parker, with his steady counsel at the bank, Lillian with her courage to share her own scars, Harris, who risked his career to shine a light on the lies, Ruth, who stood beside me in court like a shield. Each of them carried their own battles, their own regrets, and by helping me, they found healing too. Together we proved that exploitation could be fought and defeated. As for Ethan, he became my anchor. His testimony in court reminded me that even when family falters, innocence and love can survive. He was the bridge between what I had lost and what I still had. I see now that my role as his grandmother is not just to give, but to protect, to teach him that strength and kindness can live side by side. Now, when I return to the beach, I walk with my head high. The waves still crash, the gulls still circle, but I feel something different within me. Freedom. The knowledge that I am more than what others tried to take. The knowledge that I chose to fight and that I won. If you are listening to my story, remember this. Sacrifice without respect is not love. Silence in the face of abuse is not peace. And age does not mean weakness. We are stronger than they think, stronger than we sometimes believe ourselves to be. At the beach with my kids, I got a voice message. Leave quietly. Don't tell your children. Those words once frightened me. Now they remind me of the day I chose to open my eyes, to step away from fear, and to reclaim my life. Remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below if you want to hear more grandma life stories filled with emotion, betrayal, and unexpected strength.